The first knock was polite. The second one wasn't. It was the sound of a fist hammering against my front door before sunrise. I opened it to see Brenda from the HOA, her face tight with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Two uniformed men I didn't recognize stood behind her, arms crossed. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "We have a final notice. The unsightly shed in your backyard violates Community Aesthetic Code 7B. You have 24 hours to demolish it, or we will. At your expense." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, looking past her to the sprawling, empty field that bordered my 10 acres. That shed's been there since my grandfather bought this land in 1952. Before this neighborhood even existed. "The rules are the rules," she chirped, shoving the paper into my hand. "And while we're here, we're issuing a fine for your unapproved fence. It's 2 inches too tall. This is a community of standards." I watched them leave, my fingers curling around the notice. They'd been a thorn in my side since my wife passed, finding new violations every month. The color of my curtains, the excessive bird feeder, the way I parked my old Ford pickup in my own driveway. They wanted everything neat, controlled, and identical. Everything I wasn't. I didn't fight the shed. I let their contractors tear it down. I paid the fence fine. I stayed quiet when the bulldozers appeared on the field next door a week later. Brenda stood there in her crisp blazer, pointing at blueprints with the developers. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an older woman with kind eyes, stood next to me on the property line. "Can you believe it? 96 new homes. They're calling it Heritage Oaks Estates." She shook her head. "All those beautiful old oaks they're cutting down. It's a shame." "It is," I said, my voice quiet. I didn't tell her I'd already been to the county recorder's office. I didn't tell her about the brittle, yellowed pages of the land deed I kept in my fireproof safe, the one with boundary descriptions that included every inch of that field, every one of those oak trees. My grandfather had bought it all. I just watched. I watched the foundations being poured. I watched the frames go up. I smiled and waved at Brenda when she drove by in her golf cart, a queen surveying her expanding kingdom. She'd look at my modest house, my old truck, and I could see her thinking, "You're next. We'll get your property for the clubhouse expansion." The day the first model home was completed, she held a party. Streamers, a ribbon cutting, the whole show. I was invited, a formality. I went. I drank their lemonade and ate their cookies. Brenda found me, her arms sweeping toward the new houses. "Progress, David. You can't stop it. Soon, this will be the premier community in the county. Everyone will have to comply with the vision." Her eyes flicked to my worn boots. "Maybe you should consider if this is still the right place for you." I just nodded, finishing my cookie. "It's quite a vision, Brenda. You've really built something." She beamed, mistaking my calm for defeat. "We have. And the HOA fees from these 96 new properties will give us real power to maintain perfection." The final brick was laid on the last house 8 months later. The "sold" signs were popping up like daisies. That's when the official letter arrived, not from the HOA, but from the developer's lawyers. It was an offer to buy my land. The offer was low. Insultingly low. The cover letter mentioned, necessary steps to ensure harmonious community development, if I refused. I refused. The next letter came from the HOA itself. A notice of lien against my property for persistent, unresolved aesthetic violations. The fines had been quietly stacking up. The amount was enough to force a sale. That's when I finally called my lawyer. An old friend from my army days. I slid the original deed across his desk. He whistled, long and low. "David, this entire Heritage Oaks Estates is sitting on your dirt." "I know," I said. I let them finish. He looked at me, a slow grin spreading. "They built 96 houses, on land they didn't own. And they sent you fines for your fence." "They did." He started laughing. "Okay. We don't say a word. We let them file the lien. We let them take you to court to try and seize your property for the unpaid fines. And then, in front of the judge, he tapped the deed." "That's the plan," I said. The court date arrived. The courtroom was packed. Brenda was there, wearing a triumphant blue suit, surrounded by the developers in expensive ties. They looked at me with pity. The old vet in his one good jacket, about to lose his family land. Their lawyer presented the case. The long list of violations. The unpaid fines. The lien. He painted me as a stubborn, messy relic holding back community progress. Your Honor, for the good of nearly 100 new families, we must enforce the standards. The judge, a weary-looking woman, turned to me. Mr. Carter, how do you respond to these claims? I stood up. My heart was steady. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a simple, clear plastic sleeve. Inside it was the original deed. I walked forward and placed it on the clerk's desk. I respond, Your Honor, by presenting the original land deed for the parcel legally described as Lot 7, Tract 12 of the original Spanish grant, including all adjacent acreage east of the stone marker. A confused murmur went through their lawyers. Brenda frowned. The clerk took it, examined it, and showed it to the judge. The judge put on her glasses. She read. Her eyes moved from the document, to the developers, back to the document. The silence in the room grew thick enough to choke on. Finally, she looked up, her gaze landing squarely on the developer's lead attorney. Counselor, can you explain to me why your clients have constructed 96 residential units on property that, according to this certified, uncontested historical deed, belongs entirely to Mr. David Carter? The blood drained from the attorney's face. Brenda's triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, uncomprehending horror. She literally staggered back a step, grabbing a bench for support. The developer stood up, sputtering. That's impossible. We did a title search. We purchased that land from. My lawyer cut in, his voice calm and clear. You purchased it from a shell corporation that filed a fraudulent deed years ago. My client is the true and legal owner. He has the chain of title back to 1952. You built an entire neighborhood, on his backyard. The judge's gavel cracked the silence like a gunshot. Court is adjourned for 1 hour. I suggest all parties with an interest in Heritage Oaks Estates consult with their counsel. Immediately, she fixed the developers with an icy stare. You have a very, very big problem. As the room erupted in chaos, I turned to leave. Brenda was staring at me, her face white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. All her power, all her rules, all her perfect vision, it was built on a lie. My land. I walked past her, pausing just for a second. I didn't raise my voice. I just said the words I'd been waiting 2 years to say. Welcome to the neighborhood, Brenda. The hour in that quiet hallway outside the courtroom was the longest of my life. Mrs. Gable found me, her hands trembling. David, is it true? All those houses, they're on your land. It's true, I said, keeping my voice low. But, the people, the families who just moved in. They didn't. No. Her eyes were wide with worry, not for me, but for them. She was a good person. That's what Brenda and the developers never understood. This wasn't about hurting innocent folks. Before I could answer, the developer's lead attorney, a man named Reynolds, stormed out of the conference room, his expensive calm shattered. He marched right up to me, ignoring my lawyer. This is extortion, he hissed. You sat there and watched us invest millions. You let families move in. We'll bury you in lawsuits until you're a footnote. We'll prove that deed is fraudulent. My old friend, my lawyer, just smiled. Try it. The archival seal from the county is on it. We've already filed a quiet title action. It's a done deal, Reynolds. You built on stolen property. Just then, Brenda emerged. The horror had hardened into something cold and furious. She didn't look at the developers. She stared only at me. You think you've won. You're a monster. You've made hundreds of people pawns in your little revenge game. Their homes, their children's homes, you're going to throw them out on the street. She said it loud, so the growing crowd of reporters could hear. She was already spinning the story, painting herself as the compassionate leader and me as the cruel outsider. I felt the first real pang of doubt. She was wrong, but her words found their mark. The judge called us back in. Her face was grim. The property matter is clear in law, she stated. The construction was in grievous error. However, the humanitarian crisis this creates is unprecedented. Mr. Carter, what is your intention? Do you intend to evict 96 households? Every eye turned to me. The developers looked hopeful, maybe I'd be pressured into a cheap settlement. Brenda's smirk returned. She thought she had me cornered by morality. I stood. No, Your Honor. I don't want to make anyone homeless. I never did. I took a deep breath. This was the second twist, the one my lawyer and I had planned for. My intention is to assume the role of landlord. The Heritage Oaks Estates HOA is hereby dissolved. The fraudulent sale contracts are void. Each household will be offered a legitimate lease, with rent set at exactly $1 per year below the average local rate, for a period of 99 years. They will own the structures. I own the land. The gasp in the room was collective. The developers looked like they'd been shot. Their entire profit model, the property sales, the future HOA fees, evaporated in an instant. They were left with nothing but a mountain of construction debt and no assets to show for it. Brenda shot to her feet. You can't do that. You can't just dismantle our HOA. We have covenants. We have a board. You have nothing, I said, turning to face her fully for the first time. Your authority was built on my property. It was a fiction. The only covenant here is the one my grandfather made with this land, and I intend to honor it. The judge banged her gavel, but a small, tired smile touched her lips. The court recognizes the legal validity of the deed and Mr. Carter's proposed solution is a starting point for equitable remedy. We will adjourn to allow the parties, the true parties, Mr. Carter and the individual homeowners, to negotiate. The development corporation is removed as an interested party, pending their own separate litigation for fraud. As we walked out, the developers were surrounded by their own screaming lawyers. But Brenda was faster. She cut through the crowd and grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. Her whisper was venomous. You ruin everything you touch. You think those people will thank you. They'll hate you. They'll blame you for the chaos. And I'll make sure of it. She let go and vanished into the sea of reporters, already adjusting her blazer, preparing to give a tearful interview about the unstable veteran who hijacked a community. My lawyer clapped a hand on my shoulder. The hard part starts now, David. You're not just a landowner anymore. You're a landlord to 96 very confused, very scared people. And Brenda's right about one thing. She's going to turn them against you. I looked out the courthouse windows at the sprawling new neighborhood that was, legally and irrevocably, mine. The victory felt hollow, lined with thorns. I had the deed. I had the law. But Brenda had the narrative. And in the court of public opinion, armed with social media and fake sympathy, she was just getting started. The real war for my land wasn't in the courtroom. It was about to begin on my own front porch. The first gift arrived 2 days later. A beautifully wrapped basket with a ribbon, left on my porch. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a dead rat. The card, in elegant cursive, read, "Some pests just don't know when to leave. Your neighbors." I knew it was Brenda. The fancy cardstock was her style. The theatrics, too. She was making good on her promise. The online neighborhood forum, which I'd never joined, exploded. Screenshots of the court documents, edited to make me look like a greedy tyrant, were posted by user, Community Voice. The comments were a flood of anger and fear. He can raise the rent whenever he wants. This is a land grab. My life savings are in this house and he owns the dirt under it. Brenda was everywhere in the comments, a sympathetic moderator. We must stand together, friends. There are laws against this kind of cruelty. I'm consulting attorneys for us all. She was building an army, and she was using their fear as the bricks. Mrs. Gable came over, wringing her hands. She's holding meetings, David. In her living room. She's telling people you're going to sell the land to a landfill company once the 99 years are up. That this is just the first step. I sighed, looking at the pile of lease agreements my lawyer had drawn up. They were fair. More than fair. Did you tell them the truth? I tried. They call me your spy. Brenda said you're manipulating me because I'm old and alone. Her eyes filled with hurt. She's very good at this. The next escalation was the protest. On Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of chants. About 30 people were marching in a slow circle on the street outside my fence. Their signs were professionally printed: Carter equals corruption, and honor our deeds. And vet turned villain. That last one cut deep. And there, at the head of the march, was Brenda. She held a bullhorn. We will not be serfs on our own land. She cried, and the crowd echoed her. She saw me at the window and gave a small, regal wave. They weren't on my land, technically. The street was public. But the message was clear: they would siege me. They would make me the story she was writing. My lawyer urged restraint. Any reaction is fuel for her. Sign the leases, serve them legally. The reasonable people will come around. But the reasonable people were being shouted down. The first lease I mailed was returned, torn in half. The second recipient, a young guy named Leo who'd just moved in with his baby daughter, came to my door. He looked terrified. "Mr. Carter, I want to sign. The rent you're asking is a dream. But they said if I sign with you, the the neighborhood group, will make my life hell. They'll report me to CPS for my unstable living situation. They'll get me fired." He shoved the unsigned lease back into my hands and hurried away. Brenda wasn't fighting the law. She was making the law irrelevant. She was making me a social cancer, and the whole neighborhood was afraid of catching it. I felt the cold weight of her victory. I had the deed, the court order, the right. And it meant nothing against the weapon she wielded, the community itself. That's when I found the second gift. Spray painted across my garage door in blood-red letters, "Trespasser. Get out." This time, they'd come onto my property. This time, it was a crime. I didn't call the police. I knew what would happen. A report would be filed. Nothing would come of it. Brenda would call it a desperate cry for help from oppressed families. I sat at my kitchen table, the dead rat in its fancy basket on one side, the torn lease on the other. The silence in my house was complete. I had won the war for the land, but I was losing the battle for my home. I was more alone than I had ever been. I looked at the framed photo of my grandfather on the wall, standing tall on the empty field. He'd fought in a different war. He'd faced a different kind of enemy. I'd thought the deed was my weapon. It was just a piece of paper. Brenda understood the real battlefield. I needed a new strategy. Not as a landlord, not as a veteran, but as a man who was tired of being painted as the monster in his own story. I got up, walked to my safe, and pulled out more than the deed. I pulled out my old army duffel bag, dust coating my hands. I unzipped it. Inside weren't just memories. There was a small, locked metal box. I hadn't opened it in years. Brenda thought she knew war. She thought it was petitions and protests and pretty words on a bullhorn. She was about to learn what it looked like when someone stopped defending and started reconnaissance. The lease offers were a peace treaty. They'd been rejected. Now, it was time to gather intelligence. Everyone had a weakness, even a queen bee. I looked out the window at the last of the protesters heading home, laughing, thinking they'd won the day. I unlocked the box. It was time to fight on her terrain. But with my rules. It held a weapon. It held a different kind of ammunition. My old military-issue binoculars, a high-end digital voice recorder I'd bought on a whim years ago, and a notebook. My grandfather taught me to know the land. The army taught me to know the enemy. I started with public records. Zoom meetings of the Concerned Homeowners Alliance were open. I listened, recording, as Brenda expertly stoked fears. "He has the power to dig a moat around your house if he wants," she'd say, her voice trembling with faux concern. But then, in quieter moments, she'd slip. "Once we force him out, the original developers will have to come back and make us whole. We'll get proper deeds, and I'll head the reconstituted HOA. We'll finally have the control we deserve." She wasn't fighting for them. She was fighting for her own power, using their panic as a ladder. I watched. Leo, the young father, was being targeted. His trash cans were improperly positioned and mysteriously tipped over. Anonymous complaints about suspicious activity at his house were called into the non-emergency police line. Brenda's inner circle was doing her bidding. Then, I saw my opening. A city councilman, up for re-election, came to Brenda's community roundtable. She fawned over him, talking about law-abiding taxpayers and the trauma of property theft. After, as they shared coffee in her driveway, I was in my upstairs window, binoculars steady, recorder running. "It's a tragic situation," the councilman said. "But legally, my hands are tied. The courts have spoken." Brenda's sweet tone evaporated. It was low, but my parabolic mic picked it up. "Then untie them. Rezone the area. Declare his ownership a public nuisance. Find a code from the 1920s about land use. I don't care. You want the votes of 96 households. Make this problem go away." There it was. Solicitation for abuse of power. A quid pro quo. I had my first piece. But I needed the knockout blow. It came from an unexpected place, Mrs. Gable. Brenda, emboldened, had turned on her. A formal complaint was filed against Mrs. Gable's hazardous, rose bushes, which supposedly attracted bees. A notice to rip them out or face daily fines was taped to her door. The old woman was heartbroken. The roses were planted by her late husband. I went to her that night. "Can I see the notice?" I asked. She handed it to me, tears in her eyes. It was on official-looking wall letterhead. The same letterhead Brenda had used for years. But the WA no longer existed. It was a figment. The notice was a complete fabrication, a bullying tactic. And Brenda had signed it. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Don't touch a single rose, Mrs. Gable." The next day, Brenda held her largest rally yet. The street was packed. News crews were there. She stood on a makeshift podium, the bullhorn in hand, a picture of righteous fury. "Today, we serve the final notice," she declared. "We will not live under this tyranny. We will." "Excuse me, Brenda." My voice, amplified by a small speaker I'd carried out, cut through hers. The crowd parted as I walked forward, holding a simple manila folder. The shock on her face was absolute. I'd left my house. I'd engaged. "What are you doing?" She spat, recovering, playing to the crowd. "Come to gloat." "No," I said, my voice calm, carrying in the sudden silence. "I came to give you a copy. Since you seem to love official notices." I handed her the top paper from my folder. "That's a cease and desist for harassment, libel, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress, naming you specifically. The evidence is quite clear." She scoffed, crumpling it. "Empty threats. You're suing me for caring about my community." "Not just that," I said, handing her the second sheet. "This is a criminal complaint for vandalism." I pointed to my garage door. "The police have the security footage. It shows your nephew, Kevin, spraying that paint. He confessed an hour ago. Said you told him it was a prank to rally the troops." Her face went pale. The crowd murmured. "And this," I said, handing over the third paper, "is a transcript and audio file of you soliciting Councilman Riggs to abuse his office to illegally rezone my land in exchange for political support. That's a felony, Brenda." The bullhorn slipped from her hand and hit the pavement with a screech of feedback. The news cameras, now intensely interested, pushed closer. You can't," she stammered, looking at the sea of faces. Their expressions were shifting from anger to confusion, to dawning horror. "But for the neighbors," I said, turning to address everyone, my voice finally rising. "I didn't want this war. I offered you peace. A lease that protects you. Leo," I called out. The young father jumped, startled. "Your rent is locked. No one can report you. Sign it, don't sign it, that's your choice. But the bullying ends today." I looked back at Brenda, who seemed to be shrinking inside her perfect blazer. "She wasn't fighting for your deeds. She was fighting for her gavel. To be the queen of an HOA that never legally existed." I saved the final paper for last. I held it up so the cameras could see. It was a bright, cheerful flyer. "This is the real notice. A neighborhood barbecue. This Saturday. On my land. The big field where the old oaks used to be. Free food. No speeches. Just a chance to meet the guy who owns the dirt you live on. The guy who just wants some quiet." I turned and walked back towards my house, past the red graffiti that now looked like a monument to her failure. I didn't look back. The fallout was swift. The councilman denied everything, but the audio was damning. He dropped out of the race. Brenda was charged with vandalism, conspiracy, and solicitation. Her social empire crumbled overnight. The Concerned Homeowners Alliance chat group dissolved, replaced by a new, simpler one, the Oaks. Leo was the first to sign the lease. He brought over a pie his wife made. Mrs. Gable's roses bloomed untouched. The barbecue was packed. Not everyone came, but most did. Kids played where the foundation of the first model home had been poured. I grilled burgers, not saying much, just listening. The conversations weren't about covenants or fines. They were about jobs, schools, the weather. Later that evening, as the sun set over the field, my field, Leo found me. "You know," he said quietly, "my dad was a vet. He always said you guys fought for the idea that a man's home is his castle. I think I get it now. It's not about the castle walls. It's about the deed to the land it sits on. Thanks for not making us leave the castle." I just nodded, looking out at the twinkling lights of the 96 houses on the horizon. They were someone else's castles now. But the land, the steady, silent earth beneath them all, was mine. My grandfather's legacy. Not as a weapon, but as a foundation. Finally, there was peace. And it was built on something stronger than fear or paper. It was built on the truth, and sometimes, that's the most shocking twist of all. The end. Subscribe my YouTube channel for more stories.